I remember that day exactly as if it had happened yesterday. It was an ordinary morning, but inside me there was a mix of anxiety and anticipation. I was on my way to meet my family after a long period of hard work. I grabbed my bags early and headed to the airport, never imagining that day would completely change my life. The airport was crowded, as usual, people rushing from one side to another, announcements echoing through the speakers, lines forming at the boarding gates. For many, it was just another ordinary travel day. But for me, it would become the beginning of a testimony that would mark my faith forever. I sat in the boarding area and started watching the people around me. There were smiling families, children playing, couples exchanging glances, and executives focused on their laptops. I carried with me a small Bible that I always took on trips. It was almost a ritual. Before boarding, I liked to open it and read a psalm. That day I opened to Psalm 121. I lift up my eyes to the mountains. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. I didn't know it then, but that verse would become the anchor that sustained my soul through the darkest hours of my life. The flight was called. I boarded the aircraft and chose my seat by the window. I've always liked watching the vastness of the sky during flights. There's something spiritual about looking at the clouds and thinking about the creator who made it all. Next to me sat a kind elderly woman who soon started a conversation. She said she was going to visit her grandchildren. There was peace in that moment, a sense of normalcy, as if nothing could interrupt the routine we all expected. When the plane took off, I closed my eyes and said a silent prayer. Lord, be with me on this journey. During the first few minutes, everything seemed calm. The children slept, the flight attendants served drinks, and many passengers were already settled in for what seemed to be a peaceful flight. But something inside me, a small uneasiness, kept reminding me that life can change in a matter of seconds. I didn't pay much attention to it. I thought it was just fatigue. I leaned my head against the window, watching the sunlight reflect on the clouds. The view was so beautiful that I drifted into thought, remembering moments from my childhood, my family, the promises I hadn't yet fulfilled. Everything seemed to be in its place. I had no idea what was about to happen. That's the curious thing about life. It never warns us when the unexpected is about to unfold. It's as if we walk on solid ground and suddenly the floor opens beneath our feet. But that day, still at the beginning of the journey, I couldn't foresee anything. All I knew was that I felt safe, sitting in my seat, looking at the sky, and thanking God for another opportunity to live. Little did I know that this opportunity would become a turning point, a before and after in my story. What seemed to be just another ordinary flight would become the setting for the greatest miracle I have ever experienced.
Everything seemed normal until, suddenly, the plane began to shake more violently than usual. At first, I thought it was just light turbulence, something normal on any flight. But soon I realized something was wrong. The sound of the engines changed. It became deeper, as if they were being pushed beyond their limit. I looked at the flight attendant and saw in her eyes a nervousness that she tried to hide behind a forced smile. That's when a chill ran down my spine. I knew something wasn't right. The plane jolted so hard that several people let out involuntary screams. The warning lights came on, and then the oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling. The atmosphere changed instantly. What had been silence and calm turned into chaos. Children started crying desperately. Adults screamed, and some began to pray aloud. I was paralyzed for a few seconds, unable to believe what was happening. It felt like the plane was out of control, plunging toward the ground. I looked out the window and saw something that has never left my memory. One of the wings was on fire. The flames were spreading and thick black smoke filled the air. The smell of burning fuel invaded the cabin, making many passengers cough. Panic took over. Some tried to call their families, others hugged each other and wept. It was a scene of collective despair. I could hear prayers in different languages, see trembling hands trying to hold the oxygen masks, and feel the weight of fear thick in the air. Meanwhile, the plane was shaking violently. I was being slammed against my seatbelt, and each impact reminded me we were in free fall. The sounds of luggage falling from the overhead compartments and objects flying around mixed with the screams. Every second felt like it could be my last. I looked at the elderly woman beside me. She was crying and repeating, "Lord, don't let me die." I instinctively grabbed her hand, though I didn't know what to say. There were no words that could comfort anyone in that moment, only a suffocating silence before the approaching shadow of death. The plane was trembling so much it felt like it was breaking apart in midair. Every metallic crack I heard sounded like a warning that the end was near. I tried to stay calm, but the truth is that fear consumed every part of me. My heart was pounding, my hands were sweating, and my eyes filled with tears. I thought about my family, about the promises I hadn't kept, the words I wished I had said but never did. My whole life flashed before my eyes in a matter of seconds. The flight attendants tried in vain to keep order, but panic was stronger. A woman ran down the aisle and fell violently when the plane jolted again. Cries for help echoed from every direction. I'd never seen so many people calling out to God at the same time. It was as if in that instant, everyone remembered that a creator exists. The voices blended, some asking for forgiveness, others begging for mercy. And I, sitting by the window, felt my body tremble and my soul cry out for a way out. That's when a thought invaded my mind. This is the end. It was as if an inner voice wanted to convince me to give up, to accept death. But something greater within me pushed back. Amid the chaos, I realized there was still a thread of hope. I couldn't give up. Not like this. I needed to cry out to the only one who could hear me in that moment, Jesus. The plane was falling, the fire was spreading, but before any final impact, I knew I had to hold on to my faith. I didn't yet understand how, but I could feel that something supernatural was about to happen.
In the height of that despair, with screams all around and the certainty of death before me, something deep in my heart reminded me of a truth I had learned since childhood. When there is no way out, when everything seems lost, call upon the name of Jesus. I had never felt such an urgent need to pray as I did in that moment. I squeezed my eyes shut, tears streaming down my face, and cried out in silence but with all my soul. Jesus, don't abandon me now. Lord, have mercy on me. I surrender my life into your hands. As my lips trembled with fear and my mind felt on the verge of collapse, something supernatural happened. Suddenly, an unexplainable peace surrounded me. It wasn't logical. It made no sense. The plane was still plummeting, the flames were spreading, and the people around me were in pure panic. But inside me, a serenity arose that didn't come from this world. It was as if a gentle voice whispered to my heart, "My child, I am with you. Do not be afraid." It felt so real that I even opened my eyes to see who had spoken to me, but there was no one. It was Jesus holding me in the midst of chaos. My thoughts began to change. Instead of fear and despair, verses from Scripture started coming to mind. I remembered Psalm 91. He who dwells in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. 1,000 may fall at your side, and 10,000 at your right hand, but it shall not come near you. It was as if those words came alive at that very moment. It was no longer just a verse I read in peaceful times. It was the very voice of God holding me in the storm. I could feel the presence of Jesus like never before. It was as though an invisible hand was holding mine. I remember looking at the elderly woman beside me, still crying in desperation, and saying to her, with a firmness that didn't come from me, "Calm down. God is with us. He will sustain us." Even I couldn't believe how much courage I had to say that, but it was faith speaking louder than fear. She looked at me through her tears and just nodded, as if clinging to those words. At that moment, everything around me seemed to blur. I no longer heard the screams as loudly, nor smelled the smoke as strongly, nor felt the violent jolts of the plane. It was as if I was wrapped in a bubble of peace. The scene outside was chaos, but inside me there was a supernatural calm. That was when I truly understood what Jesus meant by his promise, "And surely I am with you always, to the very end of the age." He was right there with me, in the fall, in the fire, in the face of death. As I prayed, I kept repeating, "Jesus, hold me. Jesus, sustain me. I can't, but you can." I surrendered completely, knowing there was nothing I could do in my own strength. It was then I learned that faith is more than believing in moments of comfort. Faith is holding on to God's hand when everything around you screams that it's over. Faith is believing even when the plane is falling and there is no logic left to explain hope. Then something remarkable happened. Time seemed to slow down. I didn't know whether seconds or minutes had passed. It felt like eternity. The deafening noise faded in my perception, and all I could feel was the presence of God. I remember when Jesus calmed the storm on the Sea of Galilee. The disciples were terrified, but he stood and said, "Peace, be still," and the wind ceased. In that airplane, the storm around me didn't stop, but within me, there was calm. It was the greatest miracle I have ever experienced. Peace in the midst of chaos. I knew the impact was inevitable. The plane was still falling and no human power could stop it. But by then, I was no longer afraid of death. It was as if Jesus had shown me that, whether alive or dead, I was safe in his hands. And that certainty changed everything. I was no longer a prisoner of panic, but someone sustained by faith. While many screamed in despair, I simply repeated, "Jesus, I trust in you." That phrase became my shield, my anchor, my life in that moment.
Suddenly, the moment I feared most arrived, the impact. The plane came down violently, and the metallic roar blended with a deafening explosion. I felt my body being thrown forward, even with the seatbelt holding me tight. It was as if every bone in my body vibrated at once. My eyes shut instinctively, and the world seemed to fade to black. I didn't know if I was still alive or if I had already crossed the line into eternity. When I opened my eyes, a strange silence filled the air. It was as if all the noise had stopped at once. It took me a few seconds to understand where I was. The smell of burning fuel and smoke filled my lungs. The air was thick and hard to breathe. When I tried to move, I realized that, miraculously, I was still strapped to my seat, but almost completely unharmed. I looked around and what I saw is something I will never forget. Wreckage everywhere, shattered seats, muffled cries of people calling for help. I couldn't believe it. The plane had crashed. The impossible had happened, but I was alive. I ran my hands over my body, searching for broken bones, deep wounds, anything that could explain why I was still breathing. But there was nothing, just scratches and bruises. My heart was racing, yet at the same time a voice inside me said, "I have sustained you." I struggled to unbuckle my seatbelt and finally managed to stand. Every step through the wreckage felt like walking through a battlefield. I saw burned suitcases, twisted pieces of metal, papers scattered on the ground. And in the middle of that scene of horror, what amazed me most was that I was standing. Many around me had not survived. The pain of seeing that was overwhelming. Yet, at the same time, a fire burned in my chest, the certainty that Jesus had kept me safe in a supernatural way. As I walked, I saw a ray of light breaking through the smoke. It was as if a beam from heaven pierced the dark sky and shone directly where I stood. In that instant, I had no doubt. God was with me. I knelt amid the wreckage, tears streaming down my face, and said, Lord, thank you for giving me a second chance. I know I don't deserve it, but your grace reached me. Some survivors were crawling, trying to escape. I helped one of them to stand, and I realized that, even in shock, I still had strength. It wasn't physical strength, it was spiritual strength. The fear of death was gone, and I now knew that the miracle wasn't just being alive, it was being able to testify. With every passing second, the scene became clearer to me. There was no logic. A plane crash rarely leaves survivors. The statistics were against me. But God doesn't work with statistics. He works with purpose. And his purpose was to keep me alive so I could tell this story. I remember looking up at the sky and feeling that same peace I had felt during the prayer inside the plane. It was as if Jesus was saying to me, I sustained you in the fall, and I will continue to sustain you from now on. That was the moment when my faith turned into absolute certainty. I wasn't alive by chance. I was alive because God wanted me to be. As we waited for help, I sat on a broken suitcase and began to reflect. I could have died that day. I could have been among those who didn't make it. But the Lord preserved me. That didn't just save my life, it changed forever the way I see every single day I live. I stopped seeing life as something guaranteed and began to see every breath as a divine gift. The miracle wasn't just surviving a crash that should have been unsurvivable. The miracle was experiencing in the midst of death itself, the living presence of Jesus sustaining me. There, among the ashes and the fire, I discovered the true meaning of being in God's hands. Nothing can separate me from his love, not even the fall of an airplane.
As I sat among the wreckage, waiting for rescue to arrive, my mind kept repeating one single phrase: I survived. But soon that phrase became something greater. I survived because Jesus sustained me. It wasn't chance, it wasn't fate, it wasn't luck. It was the Lord who reached out his hand at the exact moment when everything seemed lost. After that day, nothing in my life was the same. I learned that every second is precious, that every breath is a gift, that life cannot be lived carelessly. The plane crashed, but I was lifted up. The world around me broke into pieces, but something new was born inside me. The fall didn't destroy me. It revealed the power of God. Returning home after all of that was one of the most emotional moments I've ever experienced. When I hugged my family, I cried like a child. I looked at each one of them and could only think, I could not be here right now. And at the same time, my heart overflowed with gratitude to God for allowing me to live that reunion. Every hug, every look, every word spoken gained a new meaning. Life became deeper, truer, and filled with purpose. I spent weeks trying to understand why I survived when so many others didn't. I didn't find all the answers, but I found one truth that's enough. God has a plan for each of us, and nothing escapes his control. Maybe I'll never understand all the details, but I know I was preserved to testify that Jesus is real and that he still performs miracles. Many times when I close my eyes, I can still hear the screams, still feel the deafening noise of the plane going down. But along with those memories, I also hear the gentle voice that told me, I am with you. And that voice continues to guide my steps to this day. It reminds me that no matter how great the fall, how fierce the turbulence, how heavy the fire or despair, if Jesus is with us, he will sustain us. This testimony isn't just about surviving a plane crash. It's about the power of a God who never abandons his children. It's about experiencing in real life the promise of Isaiah 41:10. Fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you, yes, I will help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. That word was fulfilled in my life that day, and it continues to be fulfilled every morning I wake up and breathe. Today, as I share this story, my heart burns with one desire: that you who are listening to or reading this testimony
understand that the same Jesus who sustained me is the same one who can sustain your life. Maybe you're not inside a falling airplane, but you might be facing problems that feel like they're pulling you down. A medical diagnosis, an impossible debt, a betrayal, a loss, a deep depression. The scene might look like destruction, but there is a God who still steps into the wreckage and lifts you up. I know some people may hear this story and say, it was coincidence, or you were lucky. But deep in my soul, I know it wasn't that. Because I didn't just survive. I felt the presence of Jesus with me. I heard the voice that brought peace in the midst of chaos. I saw the light that surrounded me in the darkness. And when you have a real experience with God, no human argument can ever erase that certainty. I survived a plane crash. And more than that, I survived the weight of fear, doubt, and death because Jesus sustained me. Today, every time I tell this story, it's not to exalt myself, but to exalt the one who is worthy of all glory. If I'm here, it's to tell the world, Jesus Christ is alive, he is real, and he is still saving lives. And I want to end this testimony by looking at you and saying, no matter what's falling apart around you, no matter if everything seems in ruins, hold on to Jesus. He can turn chaos into peace, the fall into a miracle, and death into life. He did it for me, and he can do it for you too. Because the same Jesus who sustained me in the fall is the same one ready to sustain you right now, wherever you are.